Hello everybody, this is Isaac Larkey presenting the Isaac Larkey My 2 Cents Success Framework. Friends, today we're talking about personal mastery and specifically about happiness. Happiness is an emotion that seems to elude many people. For centuries, people have been trying to solve the problem of finding happiness. A common expectation and also an excuse for being happy is that I'll be happy when I make my first 10 million, or I'll be happy when I find my soulmate, or I'll be happy when the baby comes. Now, during our recovery years following our car crash of January 1998 that left us with an 80% brain disability, we found that it wasn't the lack of happiness, but rather the lack of meaning that made us unhappy. Happiness is to be experienced, not pursued, our dear friends. So we set out to do an autopsy on the common reasons that led to unhappiness with the intention of sustainably solving them. It didn't make sense to us that with new technologies, people are living to 100 instead of 60, where 100 is the new 60. Despite this, the global suicide rate has gone up rather than reversed over the last decade. What we found is that there are 4 pillars of happiness. Now, as a child, we grew up in South Africa that was racially polarized by apartheid. Apartheid was a governance system created by a minority that sought to oppress, suppress, and ostracize non-white people in South Africa. For example, non-white people were not allowed to marry white people, and if they did, the non-white person would end up in jail for transgressing the Immorality Act. Non-white people were not allowed to live in the same suburb as white people. Black people entered the public areas through separate entrances from white people and had to even sit on different benches in parks and other places from white people. This repugnant, abhorrent, and malignant affliction was finally dismantled on 17 February 1990 that was marked by the release of President Nelson Mandela from prison. One day out of the blue, we received a call from a man called Peter. Peter is an entrepreneur and game farmer who heard about the Isaac Larkey My 2 Cents Success Framework workshop, and he heard about this from one of his friends. He requested to see us urgently and asked if we could travel to his majestic farm that is situated about 2 hours north of Johannesburg. We were extremely busy at the time, but he lured us by sending his private jet to pick us up. A few days later, we jettisoned onto his farm on his Gulfstream G550 twin-engine 10-seater aircraft, and as we lowered into his farm, we got a spectacular aerial view of amazing animals such as buffalo and sable antelope that he bred on his expensive 15,000 hectare farm. When we landed, and after the usual pleasantries, our conversation progressed, and as the friendship developed, Peter started becoming a bit emotional. He told us of how he left his beloved Egypt when he was only 10 years old. His mother was a strong Orthodox Christian Greek, and his father was a confident yet introverted Muslim. Like him, both were naturally white people. This was during the 60s. So to avoid the persecution that befell Egypt at that time, they decided to leave their beloved North African nation and head south towards South Africa. They thought that as they were white, they would be happy and safe in South Africa. Now, even though they had settled and lived in a white area in South Africa, they were castigated and considered to be outcasts and lowlifes. This was because South Africa's white people were predominantly of Dutch origin. They had their own language, and they had a distinctly different way of life. Peter and his family were Greek Egyptians, and as there were no Greeks living in that part of South Africa, he felt out of place. For his 13th birthday, Peter's mother threw a birthday party for her son. During the celebrations, the cops knocked on the door and arrested Peter's parents. Imagine that. The apartheid government were afraid of revolts and mass uprisings, so to protect the idiotic regime, the law that they were arrested for breaking provided that domestic meetings could not exceed 12 people. And as there were 13 people to mark Peter's 13th birthday, they had contravened that legal baloney contrived by a few mad racists in suits. That law even made provision that Peter's parents could be held in prison for up to 90 days without a trial. Fortunately, they got off without a warning. So even white people were oppressed in apartheid South Africa. After that incident, Peter's parents decided to move from that part of town to the brown part of town. The brown part of town was predominantly populated by Hindu, Tamil and Muslim people, whose roots trace back to India. In this part of town, Peter was considered too white. What were they to do? In one part of town, they were not considered white enough, and in this part of town, they were too white. The experiences left Peter with scars. Up until that day, he could not muster the courage to tell anyone of his painful past, of his lack of belonging, his yearning for identity. And even if he did share it with anyone, people would think that he was mad. I mean, really? A white man growing up in white apartheid South Africa, oppressed by white people? Think about this. People would have thought that he had lost his marbles. These pains were exacerbated by the fact that he yearned to visit a church and a masjid. He told us that when he was 17 years old, he went to a masjid. Most worshippers were brown, and some of these fools were arrogant enough to believe that they held a monopoly to Islam. Seeing a white teenager enter their shrine was an abomination of their value system, so in an abhorrent and repugnant fashion, they chased him away. And for over 3 decades, Peter didn't set foot in neither a masjid nor a church. To help Peter get rid of his childhood scars that he had carried well into his 50s, we put a robust plan of action into place for him. At times, we met at the church. On other occasions, we met at Nizamiya Masjid that is located between Johannesburg and the capital city Pretoria. Nizamiya is a replica of Hagia Sophia that was formerly a cathedral in Istanbul in Turkey. Nizamiya was built by the respected and loved entrepreneur and philanthropist Uncle Ali. Nizamiya, like Hagia Sophia, is an architectural masterpiece. With its awe-inspiring, heart-stirring and spine-tingling beauty, its visitors are captivated by the splendor of its imposing columns, magical facade and beautiful interior. At Nizamiya, Peter would find peace, serenity and tranquility while enveloped in the seclusion of its magnanimous surroundings. During the great Islamic holy month of Ramadan, when deeds are multiplied between 10 and 700 by the CEO of the universe, Peter would recuse himself in the walls of Nizamiya for the last 10 days of the month, observing itikaf. That is a magical journey that is an outstanding recipe for the reformatting and rejuvenation of the mind, heart and soul, while simultaneously refreshing our connection to the CEO of the universe. Now, because Dad was a Muslim and Mum a Christian, he yearned for both religion and both cultural identities. But this also confused him. When he tasted and drank from the wells of Christianity and Islam, he discovered his nuances, biases and preferences and found that his frequency resonated more in Islam. And through that, he found his identity and peace. Our dear friends, belonging is a powerful tool that is driven by values and underpinned by love. Belonging gives a person identity, and identity gives a person love. Love is the glue of the mind. Where there is love, there is belonging, and where there is belonging, there is meaning, and meaning leads to happiness. Our dear friends, it's been a pleasure sharing this excerpt from you that is from our bestseller Highway to Heaven. If you'd like to learn more about our exciting audios, as well as the remaining 4 pillars of happiness, as well as our workshop, please visit our website at isaaclarkey.com.